Hi there, folks. Saber4 here. I'm going to talk just briefly today about the meta post-Richmond and just kind of the reset that we had this weekend. I know a lot of coverage has been devoted to that, so I'm not going to go too far into detail, but let's take a look at what's coming. We're going to talk about, very briefly, kind of the openness of the meta, what we saw after a Django ban, and where we see a major tournament. We'll discuss the top 8, kind of what was in there. We'll look at a quick discussion of meta health, talking about the shift, and then we're going to go into some sample decks. We'll look at the Qi'ra Data Vault that was John Tata's that finished top 8, an Anakin Colossus from Phoenix Gaming that finished in the top 4, and then the 2 finalists, Quinlan Tarkentown. Michael went undefeated until the finals and actually split with this deck. That was the one loss that they had, and then William O'Neill, the winner, and Sabine ECL. So let's take a little look. 29 leaders and multiple variants in this tournament out of a field just short of 600. So this is the largest Star Wars Unlimited tournament to date, and we got a very healthy meta out of it with, well, a little more than 1 in 4 leaders actually making an appearance. Only one leader had a 10% meta share, and that was Sabine. You had a couple that were right behind them. You had a 9% share for Quinlan. You had a little bit more Qi'ra than I expected, but we did cover that blue-green soft control here on the channel because it did kind of surface as one of the things that's a possibility. A little less hard control than we thought, but Boss did still make an appearance. A big surge in Set 1 Darth Vader. You had some appearances from Luke. You had some other things like that. One of the biggest surges that we saw was the uptick in Data Vault. Up to now, it's been very, very highly contained as far as the major bases that we see. And we see the rare ones would be Tarkentown and ECL. Tarkentown almost exclusively with Quinlan. Almost exclusively, Quinlan is running with Tarkentown. And then ECL, if you were playing Sabine at all, there was a 99% chance that you were on ECL. 14 different leaders made the top 64, which is a pretty healthy share. A lot of them, there were several that converted above their rate. Qi'ra was definitely one. The Mandalorian showed up. Dooku showed up in the top 64, which is pretty awesome. Both the Spark of Rebellion and Jump to Lightspeed Darth Vader made decent shares in the top 64. But then we had some pretty familiar faces once we got down to the top 8. And that top 8 consisted of a Quinlan Tarkentown that had gone undefeated through Swiss play, Sabine ECL, Han Green, Han Yellow, Anakin Colossus, Qi'ra Data Vault, a Cad Bane Tarkentown, and a Quinlan Tarkentown that was a mirror in the opening round of the top 8. Really briefly, what's the shift? So when we look at banning one leader, what we want to understand is how the others moved in response. Quinlan was really the one leader who was being kind of fair into Django. And because of the amount of stuff that a lot of these other leaders had to play in order to compete with the Django decks, we saw a noticeable shift in how those competed now. And one of the big shifts here, there are some bigger number shifts, but one of the big shifts here, because these two decks were so popular, is this Quinlan Red and Sabine Green pairing. Sabine picked up 10 percentage points on Quinlan, and so what had been a matchup that heavily favored, or not terribly heavily, but that favored Quinlan before, now favors Sabine. But Sabine Green picked up a lot of different spots where she got some advantage. A little lost to Anakin Blue, a big jump over Luke Green, lost to Cad Red a little bit, but a big pickup on Han Green and Gar Yellow. I would say that Gar Yellow was one of her primary weaknesses before, because not being able to ping off those shields meant that Gar could effectively race her. Qi'ra Green is probably a little bit more of an anomaly just because there was such a surge in it. But you see that Qi'ra Green, with that surge in numbers, got a big adjustment to how she played into several of these decks. It's an interesting thing and just kind of a food for thought. And this was pulled out of Ian's data from Star Wars Unlimited Competitive Hub. Does a really great job of running spreadsheets, and this is one of them where we just looked at the changes in matchup win rates. So what we're looking at going forward, if these two remain the dominant decks, is that Sabine has once again kind of taken the lead. And so we would expect the next set of tournaments to respond to that with a little bit more of a Sabine tech mid-range, and we'll see what happens. Anyway, it reads Rebel Trader because they put up the deck lists. This was John Tata's. This is the Qi'ra Data Vault, and I got to see this one played on stream a couple of times, or a couple of games. Pretty common run of what Qi'ra is trying to do. It's a fairly blue deck, which means that Childson can be his appropriate size. He did run in the sideboard all the way up to Annihilator, which I thought was an interesting call just because I'm still not sold on Annihilator. Top Target in the side deck is another good run. But Qi'ra just trying to do Qi'ra things, which is to say, get out there, ramp in the early game, and then move on to a spot where the leader flip has a very high board impact. She's able to hold most leaders hostage and take them out kind of in one swing. But this is a nice standard soft control. You don't see the very heavy-handed instance of just removal, and nothing else. But Qi'ra likes to ramp, get her on the board, play barrage, use things like Traitorous, get to our big units, reset the board if we need to, and then get out there and close the game out with either the big ships in space or with a very stable ground package consisting of that reinforcement walker plus Maul and or Vader. Great run by this deck and many others. Qi'ra converted well over her percentage, and so this was a really big surge this weekend. Anakin Colossus had a finalist again, or not a finalist, but a top 8 again this weekend, with a top 4 actually. This deck was run very efficiently off of Data Vault, and because of the volume of red that is in here, did not run Queel, which is a thing that I have tended to do in a lot of mine. I run a little bit more blue and pull the C-3PO R2, but the preference for 3 Outer Rim Outlaws over a full complement of Yoda in here is an interesting call that I think worked very well. You did have Cham Syndulla in here in the main deck. Having Resolute out here, I did not get to see that one played to really understand what the target of it was, but this is a unique little bit of spice here. But this deck played very well. Anakin Blue played pretty well into the wide meta, and I think this is a really good run of how that works. You do have some interesting calls here. The covering the wing is a nice one to be able to drop a shield on something. We talked about Anakin. I'm going to do a video on him this week. One of the big things that he's got here is that he does have several units with the Outer Rim Outlaws that are able to deal with a 5 health unit immediately due to Anakin's ability. And then Red 5 out here to be able to clean a lot of things up. So this was the Anakin Blue, like I said, that finished in top 4. Let's look at a couple of the finalists. This is wound up being the runner-up. Michael went through Swiss undefeated and then lost to Sabine there in the finals, but the two players had played in the opening Swiss rounds as well, and Michael won that one. So these two decks actually split 3-3 over their 6 games. Not a whole lot of major special surprises here in Quinlan Boss. A lot of 2s and 3s of. Very focused deck on doing what it does. It's getting out here, getting your units on the board that have, that get you to force units, being able to turn on force throw. You did have quite a bit of upgrade removal here in the main deck with 2 Bamboozles and 2 of Disabling Fangfighter. I saw the play a couple of different times where Guerrilla Soldier went down against an empty board, and that is a fantastic play because it's going to be 3 damage indirect that goes to the base, ready the unit, swing for 2 more. That is a wonderful play to be able to have out of this deck. Sabine is a very nice one to use in here and has always been a good part of this just because of her ability to break through shields and kill off a 2/2 unit that's shielded. And so she is a nice play to counter something like Crafty Smuggler. And then, of course, we run Deplo and Han. And then finally, we have a Sabine Energy Conversion Lab that is your winner. This one, the main interesting thing here was the inclusion of a couple of copies of Timely Intervention, and then a really great use of Rebel Assault. I saw this one again in the semifinal as well, where the Darksaber came in and just cleaned up games, kind of in spite of the fact that upgrade removal is there. It is still one of those things where getting off a swing with Darksaber is a massive, massive shift. I do like the use and how they were able to use Sabine's Masterpiece in this, being able to drop the experience token on it even through ECL and remove things that were 4 cost to take out a Falcon with Sabine's Masterpiece was a play that they made a couple of different times on stream, and that's a really strong one. This is a heavy Rebel package with the exception of things like Poe and Wrecker, but this is a solid deck that wound up coming away with the win. So if you are headed towards your next major, this is where we are right now, and we will see you guys next time.